Welcome back into another journey back in time. I really enjoy these because you think, a lot of people, especially modern day people, think what happened in the past is somewhat insignificant. But the more I look at these, the more I realize how important they are. So what we're going to do, this one is, it's September, October 1971. I wasn't even fishing tournaments yet. Don't remember, I didn't even start fishing tournaments until March of 1974. So this is really looking past even when I started. But this is also so much of what gave me the motivation and the belief that I could do this. And so many of these things in here are just steps in that direction. Again, September, October 1979. I'm going to go back through here. And again, I've just gone through them and something will pop into my head, and it can liable to happen on this one just as well. But, you know, and this one here kind of reminded me, I was in the Pasadena Bass Club in 71. I joined that club, and that's really where my learning started to really escalate, because tournament fishing, a lot of people back then really didn't like it, even local anglers. But what it did for me, it really motivated the learning, because when you were fishing with a bunch of other guys, and we had some really good guys. I look back on it now. We had Frank and Pickens. They were incredible shallow water anglers. And I didn't know what was good or bad totally back then. And they really matched what I'd grown up doing, fishing small creeks and ponds and stuff, shallow. We didn't think about deep. But then, and I didn't realize it for years, but we probably had one of the best deep water fishermen in existence. No matter where you want to look, and a guy named Bill Garland. He was dedicated, and even then it was just little flashers that, but he was magical with it. And again, eventually he became the mentor for my little brother who fished tournaments with me and joined the club, Randy Fight. And and as good as they both were at fishing deep, I can't imagine what they could have done with today's modern equipment. It would have blown people away. I wish I could bring them with some time machine into this era, new era of electronics. But night fishing is one thing I didn't do a whole lot of. But my bass club the Pasadena Bass Club did have 2 or 3 nights tournaments before I quit in 1974. And it was really a strange world because I like to move around, okay? And night fishing at first restricted my movement, so I didn't like that part of it. And finally I just said, okay, I'm gonna move just like I do in the day and hope I don't run into one of these jillions of trees that exist in Rayburn and Toledo Bend. But one of my best night tournaments, me and one of the club anglers named Bubba Lawrence drew each other in the tournament. And we went and sat on this one point and we whacked them. But here's the interesting thing about Bubba. He couldn't hear. I mean, he could read lips, but he couldn't hear. Well, at night, it's a little hard to read lips. So we got this little way of working. Whenever he'd need something, he'd stomp on the bottom of the boat. And he could talk, and I would turn, but for me to answer him, he had to shine the light in my face. Well, in pitch dark, you know how much all of a sudden you're blinded, and now you got to recover from the light in your face. That went on all night long. But he would, and if I'd hang one, I would stomp on the bottom of the boat, because he wouldn't be able to hear me yelling for the net, and he'd know he'd get the net. So it was a comical night. I mean, if you night fish, you know the bottom gets slippery. Back then when we were swinging the fish in the boat, there's slimes on the bottom and the dew's on the bottom, and we're both busting our butts left and right. But it was really, I'll never forget that night fishing with Bubba Lawrence. We were on Sam Rayburn too, which was an incredible lake. Fortunately, that night we got on a point, and we didn't have to move. They just came across that point, and in waves of fish, and we Here, I want y'all to look at this. Now again, I didn't start guiding until 1974 when I quit my job with Exxon, trying to create some income in between tournaments. But this was a cartoon deal started by Don Worth of BassMaster magazine, and it's been in BassMaster magazine. But I love this picture, and I remembered it when I finally, me and my brother Randy Fight started guiding. We made our little logos on these deals, and you'll see it right here. And really look at it close. It's fascinating because Randy's the one with the long hair, and I'm the one with the hat on. And it was a guide service, and we both had these on sides of our cars. And it was on Lake Conroe, which was only 2 or 3 years old then. But you can see that the price back then in full day, and to me and Randy, that was a lot of money. $60 for a full day, $40 for a half day. It's comical nowadays, but that's where I got that ideal of that to do our little advertising. What is it? You have to excuse me every once in a while. I have to look at this. Oh yeah, that's what we just did. That was the guide service. Again, Harry and Charlie's still in the magazine. He still does, Don Worth still does those things to this day. This is, again, one of the people back then, 71, Roland Martin, Bill Dance, they were, again, my inspiration. And I didn't realize it until time went by, how they really motivated me. And Roland motivated me because he just seemed, what it says here tells his pattern method. I never heard the word pattern in fishing at that point in time. In other words, if you catch one fish on a certain object like a stump, the pattern fishing basically means all the other active fish in the area are going to be doing something very similar to that. So that becomes a pattern. So find another stump, fish is on the shady side, then find another stump, fish. But that's a simple explanation. All the fish in a given time in a given area are doing the same thing. The key there is the active fish. Not all fish are active at the same time. So, but Roland was the one who really, really started me thinking in that direction more than anything else. And he had really a lot, I don't go into it, but Roland, he had all this scientific stuff to check temperatures down to certain depths. This was long before you really had all the electronic stuff we had nowadays. So he was way ahead of his time. He was kind of our scientist. He made me realize that there's an art and science to this. Before then, everybody thought fishing was luck. Throw your bobber out, lean up against a nice shade tree, and watch your bobber. When it goes under, pick it up and catch the fish. That was not the science. This Roland introduced me to a totally new way of looking at all of that. I saw this right here. This is, again, pond fishing, and this guy in this little belly tube. And back then, too, before I quit my job, I did start fishing some bigger tournaments. There was a tournament in Texas. It was probably the largest tournament in all of bass fishing at that time. It was called the State Bass Fishing Tournament, and it was put on by Earl Golding out of Waco, Texas. He was an outdoor writer for the Waco Tribune Herald, and he put on these tournaments. And they had all kinds there would be over 1,200 at least anglers in this tournament. These tournaments, there was an individual division, there was a team division, there was a husband-wife division, there was a father-son or daughter division. There was many divisions. And one year, this one kid won the Texas State individual fishing out of an inner tube. He didn't have a boat. He was in this inner tube. And typical and this is where fishermen are not immune to improper human behavior. In other words, and finally the next year, they said he had to have a boat to fish. It wasn't fair for him to be able to, because what he did do, he would put his inner tube in the back of his little car. He would drive to a certain area of the lake, go out and fish it. Then there wasn't nothing there. He'd put the inner tube back in the car, drive to another area of the lake, put his inner tube in and go out. And they thought somehow that was putting them at a disadvantage. So unfortunately, they made a rule that you had to have a boat, which was sad, but that's just, again, typical human behavior at times. And here's a little map. I don't know if you can see it, but it was kind of humorous because where I grew up, there was farm ponds all around me. Okay, most of the farmers didn't. They had cattle in there, and they didn't want a bunch of kids come running across the pasture. They didn't know what we were doing, so we would figure out. Okay, here's the farmhouse. Okay, the lake's here. Now we don't want them to be able to see us sneak into the lake. So we'd drive down the road to the railroad track, and we'd hike down the railroad track and say, okay, here's some trees let's fish this side, and they won't be able to see us fishing the farm pond. And I stocked about 80% of the farm ponds in that area, so I felt like I had a right to. I only had it there was the farm that I came fishing, and he finally came down and called us, but he was so nice, and his name was Lamb. Lamb's Farm Ponds. He became, again, because I stocked it, and everyone in the area. And here's, again, we've seen this in some of the early issues where Bill Dance had, $22,000 fishing for bass. And I went, holy cow. He won $22,000. And I had a good job. I had probably one of the best jobs you could have at that age I was at. I was working for Exxon Oil Company downtown Houston, in the second largest computing center in the world. And had benefits, had retirement, had everything you wanted. And, but when I saw 22,000, I still only made $10,000 a year. And so when I saw 22,000, I said, he's making more than I am in 2 or 3 tournaments a year. So again, it probably was, I didn't use that information due diligently, but that still was a positive for me that I kept using for myself to, here's a gentleman, I'm just going to mention him, most of you won't know him, but his name's Stan Fagerstrom, and he was a writer. He was actually from the Northwest, and this article is simply about clips, because a lot of people used clips back then to, so they wouldn't have to retie a knot every time. They just clip it, put another bait on, clip it back. But he did come out with an article. Most of the tournament guys didn't like clips because we were buying the cheap ones, and if a really big bass get around them, you would actually straighten the clip out and he would come off. But Stan was kind of showing here how to choose a good clip. He was a world champion caster. I only seen 1 or 2 other people my whole life that could cast as well as he could. And he'd be at a lot of the boat shows and tackle shows, doing casting demonstrations. Okay, I'm going to go into an area I normally do not go into in my fishing world. Okay, this is Chaplin's Corner. Okay, and I'm going to. It's by Reverend John Banks. I didn't read this when it first came out. I read it here recently because I don't want to get into the religion part of it, but this is religion. But this is one of the first religious people I actually read that treated nature the right way. And what do I mean by that? And I'm going to read it because here's the key. It says, God created the earth and called it good, the mountains and streams and the animals and the birds, the sky with sun and moon. He was pleased. He then told man, you have dominion over it all. But this is the beauty of this article. He goes, we need to define dominion. Because I've run into too many people in my life think, well, man can do what he wants because he has dominion over it all. That is absolutely incorrect in my way of thinking. And anyway, he goes into basically to explain that we should be good custodians. We don't have the right to abuse the land. We don't have a right to take advantage of the many creatures that we come in contact. I mean, I've even had people tell me, I can shoot as many deer as I want because we have dominion over them. Oh, really? I said, that didn't make sense, but this was a beautiful article. He even starts to talk about, how we're responsible for maintaining the rivers and the water and the smog in the air. We need to be pointing it out. And he mentioned Rachel Carson's book. I don't know if any of y'all know Rachel Carson. She wrote this book called Silent Spring, which means that if we kept pumping pesticides and stuff from these big chemical plants into the environment, it would eventually, the whole ecosystem would be destroyed, and you would never hear even a bird chirping again. So I love this article. It was, and one of my favorite movies all time was Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon. It was about Francis of Assisi. And one of my favorite lines is when he's very poor church. He builds his church from just the dirt and living in the field. But he basically, he finally had to go to the Pope. And all the hierarchy of the church didn't even want to let him in because him and his fellow monks just were barefoot, they looked dirty. And finally they let him in, and he explains his concern about, the poor people and about himself and his church. And the Pope actually got out of his seat and walked down and got on his hands and knees and kissed his feet. And he looked up at him and said, "You don't need to come to us. You have one of the greatest gifts that you've been given by God is the ability to speak to him through his animals." And so being a natural person, Native American, in a lot of ways, I think about how connected we are. I'm really glad I came back and read this Chaplain's Corner. And in the final thing in it, he says, dominion means to protect, not to destroy. So it was just a beautiful, beautiful thing to read. And this is, again, just some of the tournaments early on that I kept following, and I always entered. I was looking at the long line of boats down through here, and all kinds of different boats. But John Powell was from Alabama, and he was notoriously known for shallow water fishing. So it's, again, this is the only interest I'm pointing this out is this. I kept thinking, man, can I do that? Can I do that? And again, I was fishing one of the biggest tournaments in the state called the Texas State Tournament by Earl Golding. And I entered the individual division one year, and I ended up second out of 1,000 anglers. And so obviously my ego really went skyrocketing. So even more so, I followed these tournaments. Another interesting thing about this tournament is, this is again 1971. You'll look here, and here's two fellow Missouri anglers that I finally got to know. Didn't even know them at the time. Charlie Campbell and Johnny Morris. And a lot of people don't know that about Johnny especially. They know most people knew Charlie is a tournament angler, but Johnny was fishing these tournaments long before he ever started Bass Pro Shop and created Tracker Marine. And so it was, again, a fascinating story. Again, that's a journey back through time with September, October 1971. Thank you for joining me.